Welcome back. We're under the F-250, going to be doing a rear differential fluid change. I'm going to be completely pulling the cover and installing a LubeLocker gasket instead of the typical RTV. Throwing the cardboard down, got to keep the driveway somewhat clean. Getting ready with our catch pan. Tracked the tools as I went through this project. Got the manual ratchet, 3/8 drive. I also used the Milwaukee on a few different fasteners. A couple random 3/8 extensions. 1/2-inch socket. My differential uses 1/2-inch hex head bolts on the cover. You're also most likely going to want a torque wrench. I installed a LubeLocker gasket, so I wanted to make sure all my bolts were equal, so I didn't end up with any leaks. I also used a gasket scraper, handy tool to have. Putty knife, get kind of a heavier bladed one. You'll see what I did in this video. I would not recommend. I used a chisel and ended up bending the cover and had to flatten it back, so yeah, use a putty knife. I used my right angle air grinder with a Roloc attachment and a fine 3/8 bristle disc. You can also use Scotch-Brite, or you can just use a manual brush or just a Scotch-Brite pad. As with any project, wear the proper PPE. I used some safety glasses, I used some gloves, just some latex gloves to keep my hands clean. That gear oil is stinky stuff to work with. Starting off with the actual work, I'm removing the fill plug. Always the first step you want to do. You want to make sure you can fill whatever you're trying to empty. On mine, the 10.5-inch Sterling, it is a 3/8-inch square drive. So you can just use your ratchet or an extension. Check the plug there. It's a magnetic plug. Didn't see any heavy bits of metal on there, so that was good. Another tool I forgot to mention that you might want to use, a little impact. Again, 1/2-inch, taking all the bolts off here. Don't be dumb like me and use an actual impact socket, not the chrome. On the very top bolt, I want to back it out a couple threads just so it's loose. This will keep the cover from completely falling off after we break it loose and creating a much bigger mess than I want to deal with. Here's what I mentioned a little earlier. I used a chisel to get my cover off. Also used a hammer here. This cover is a little bit thin and will bend quite easy. I recommend a putty knife to go around and actually cut all the silicone. That will keep the cover much flatter and it should be much easier to work with. Biggest thing here is make sure you're not digging into the housing, into the actual axle housing. It is cast steel, but you could still scratch it to the point where it might not seal again, so just be a little careful there, even if you're just using a putty knife. Broke it loose. And we're fully broken loose there, so that bolt on top is holding the cover in place, making life a little bit easier. Taking the top bolt off to get the cover completely off. That smells just great. Nothing quite like old gear oil. If you know, you know. Starting to wipe everything down. I want to go through and clean everything up. Knock off all the crud in the surfaces, on the gears, on the carrier itself. And what I'm doing here is there's a little depression or a little sump at the bottom of the pumpkin that holds quite a bit of oil, as you see, and a bunch of dirt or fine particles or the actual broken down components of the oil. Since I'm in here, I just want to try to do as good a job as possible getting everything clean. That'll help extend the life of the gear set, the bearings, any of the other components in here, and overall just justify the time that this maintenance takes. Getting in here with the gasket scraper and starting to scrape off all that old silicone. I want the surface as clean as possible before putting on the LubeLocker. I'm sure a few of you may have noticed the shock on the driver's side. It looks like the shock is blown. That is shock oil from a blown seal. So yeah, watch out for a video on those. I'll be replacing those with some Bilsteins here in the future. Got that pretty clean. I think I'm happy with that. So moving on to the cover. Wiping that out, getting all the dirt, the grime, the dust off of there, and wiping down with some brake clean. And here's the Roloc bristle brush that I'm using. These 3Ms, these are awesome. They're actually quite delicate, and it's pretty hard to harm the metal that you're grinding on. I barely call it grinding. I mean, it just shines it up pretty well and gets all that silicone off. It's fantastic. Here's where the chisel kind of ruined my day. Had to bring it into the shop on a flat surface and just fix the flange there. Try to get it as flat as possible. Using the edge of the table, using a body hammer, getting it as flat as I can, especially since I'm using the LubeLocker. Put it flange down on the table, push down in a few spots, see where it's rocking, and just keep going at it and trying to get this as flat as possible. I couldn't quite justify buying an aluminum cover yet. I do want to go with the Banks cover, and those are pretty expensive, so you know, maybe later. This will be just fine for now, but that Banks cover is looking pretty sweet. Got it nice and flat. One more time, going around the rim, cleaning it up. Going with the LubeLocker. So this is a Sterling 10.5 or a Ford 10.5. It's got 12 bolts. You see on the gasket here, it does have a bolt pattern that it wants you to tighten it in. Typical star type cross pattern, just to keep everything as even as possible as you go through the bolts. Using my bristle brush on the axle housing as well. So while these bristle discs are very delicate, they still do contain a ceramic abrasive. Ceramic's almost as hard as diamond, and I don't want those in my gear set. I don't want those in the bearings. I don't want that anywhere in the axle housing. So I do my best to take some cotton towels, push it into the nooks and crannies, and cover the gears as well as I can. Be careful with any nearby brake lines or wiring or cables or anything like that. Mine has the hydraulic brake lines here and also the cable brake lines for parking brake, and also my wiring for the locking diff. I love how well these bristle discs work. It takes off all that silicone and it still even leaves the factory mill marks on there. I would recommend going with the genuine 3M ones. They do last a lot longer and they work quite well, but they are pretty expensive. Doing a final wipe down with some brake clean. I also blew everything out with some air, which I, for some reason, lost the footage. I did wire wheel all the bolts and got all the silicone off those before I installed again. I didn't film that though. I'm lining up the LubeLocker in the right orientation so I can just throw it up and bolt it on. I'm also putting my reference there for a bolt sequence as I tighten everything up. Slap on the cover. The nice part about the LubeLocker is you don't need any sealants. It's just a dry fit. We'll bolt in, making sure not to damage the gasket at all. And tighten that. Throw a few more bolts to try to get that gasket aligned before I do any tightening. Trying not to damage that gasket at all. putting a little torque on that because I got it where I wanted it. Not completely torqued down or tightened down yet. Biggest thing I'm doing here is making sure that gasket doesn't get clipped or damaged as I tighten these in. I'm screwing 1 or 2 threads in by hand before I take the ratchet and power them down. Again, these are pretty loose. If anyone knows, this Milwaukee ratchet isn't exactly the strongest ratchet in their lineup, and it's great for getting it pre-torqued. Here we go with actually torquing the fasteners. This is the time I'm paying attention to that actual star pattern and making sure these get torqued in a specific sequence. Pretty sure I did 30 to 35 foot-pounds. I actually don't remember. It's a couple months later that I'm editing this video. If you're doing this, just verify what your torque values on your specific application are and just go with those. I always do one final pass in a row just to make sure I caught every bolt, and yeah, we should be good. Pulling out my manual, double checking what my specs are on what type of fluid I need to install. So my 10.5-inch rear axle, I need 6.9 pints, not quarts, of 75-140 synthetic gear oil. I prefer Mobil 1 oil. That's just what I like to use. I know the Motorcraft is specified for this installation, but I'm using the Mobil 1. At the end of the day, just go with what's in your manual. That's what the engineer specified, so that's what it's designed for. The more off the books you go, the more you're opening yourself up for possible problems in the future, and I am fine with taking that risk on my truck, but some people watching this might not be. So just follow your manual at the end of the day and you'll be good. I'm sure some of you noticed when I took out the fill plug, there was some staining, leaking gear oil from the fill plug. So I'm throwing on some Permatex thread sealant to stop that from happening again. Cleaning up these surfaces a little bit so I can tell if there's any leaks in the future. And starting to dump some oil in. Ooh, sorry about that. Quart number 2. Quart 3. And half a quart 4. So I'm filling it up so I see a couple of those little drips and dribbles out. That slow dribble after I wipe it away, that tells me I'm at the perfect level. I always usually double check with my finger just to verify it's actually there and it's not leaking off the threads, but yeah, we're good to go. Reinstalling the fill plug. I'm actually not sure what the torque spec is on this, but it's going into a cast steel housing. It'd be pretty hard to break, but still, you gotta be a little careful here. Don't just ram it home. And definitely don't use any impact tools here. Final little cleanup, also sprayed down with a little brake clean here to get all the oil off and double check, see if we get any leaks later. Initially, I'm not seeing any leaks on this LubeLocker. I drove it around, heated it up, and still no leaks. And again, it's a few months later after I did this, I'm editing the video, I still have not had any leaks. So I'd recommend the LubeLockers. They're pretty awesome. I don't like silicone, so anything to avoid silicone is a complete win for me. So that's that. We are done. Thanks for making it to the end here. Really appreciate the watch. Check around the channel. I've done an oil change on this pickup. I'm going to be doing the front diff here soon. Already done the transfer case. And we're going to be doing an ATF fluid drop and filter change coming up. If that sounds interesting, you can click the subscribe button and be notified when those videos come out or any other videos come out. Again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.